Hello, hello, and welcome everyone to In Time. My name is Nicholas $400 Soutter, and with me, as always, is Ansgar the Hat Odinson.
Hey, everybody.
And this is sort of like a two-parter, I guess. Yesterday we covered our first thing on fake news, and today we are going to be covering bloggers and how they can influence fake news. For those of you who are interested, we do have a Patreon account. We are currently just 100% Patreon supported, and that's very important to us. If you would like to become a patron, the link is included as well as in the description, as well as to the Streamlabs Super Chat if you want to use that system, or you can just use we are monetized. You can do super chats through that. For our patrons, we do a patron hangout. We do. I'll try not to say that again. I have to script these a bit better.
Well, I'm glad you pointed it out because I would have been far crueler.
Yeah, that's why I pointed it out. I'm going to cop to that one before Ansgar said, we're going to do our post-mortem on the show. And I'm like, okay, so how could we do better next time? And Ansgar's going to say, we could just not say do on live air. So wrong pen. We have Patreon hangouts, and you get to sit and talk with us, and or at least talk with me. Ansgar is just sitting in the back throwing his own feces.
It's true. It's what I do every stream. I know it looks like I have really good video editing software, so it looks like I'm talking to you all, but I'm really just,
Yeah. Well, it's the hat. The hat's responsible for the hat. Does 95% of it.
It does.
It does. Well, and then what was it? I had gotten into a kerfuffle earlier, and somebody had said, gee, I wish I could help. I wish I could be there. I'm off. I'm out of the country, and I was just like, I don't need help. I don't need a gun. I've got an Ansgar.
But it's really the hat that does that work too.
It's the hat, but again, it's 80s movies references. All right, bad 80s, the best of the bad 80s movies references. Anyways, and we also,
movies.
I do too.
Yeah.
So we've got the Patreon hangout, and we listen to our patrons. In fact, actually, and we discuss show ideas, and we really listen to our patrons. And I always say listen to our patrons. No, we steal from our patrons. Our patrons come up with a lot of the good ideas. They're like, you should do a show on this, and we're like, nah, that's not a great idea. Ansgar, we're so gonna do a show on this.
Why credit the patrons when we can just
No, absolutely not. So we hope you'll consider that. And let's see, I don't know, I think that just about covers that. We've got a Discord.
We have a merch shop.
We do have a merch shop. You can get I don't think you can get Ansgar on a mug. You can get his hat on a mug.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's all the shilling we need.
I think that covers it.
Yeah. So today we're covering bloggers and their influence on our news cycle in general, all the way from people retweeting stories to blogger stories that are quite obviously completely fictitious, actually making it entirely into the mainstream news cycle, which is quite alarming. I have prepared a few stories. Most of them come out of California, and the reason most of them are coming out of California is not because California has a problem with bloggers and fake news any more than any other state. The thing is I live in California, and so I'm more intimately aware with the goings on in California. So when I see these stories, they're far easier for me to pick out and do the research and that kind of thing. So the first one I want to bring up is this one. So not long ago, Dr. Drew Pinsky. Do you know who Dr. Drew Pinsky is?
I do. Okay. And he is the I don't know if he's still doing. He did two I thought pretty good shows. He was on Loveline for a while with MTV's Loveline, which is giving out love, sex advice to the MTV generation, because I do music videos. And then he was on he did the rehab program for a while, which was a startling that was a difficult show to watch. So, and it's hard to tell too that the only other thing, we should discuss this at some point too, but are you making money off the victims? Is it education? I don't know what that show was, but I do respect the man, yes.
Yeah. Well, recently, he went on to well, first of all, he is for his credentials, he studies addiction, right? And that's what he does is addiction. That's what his
Yes.
doctorate is in. Um, well, he recently went on to a where I forget, I think it was a podcast where he was being interviewed, and he
Mhm.
basically said he asserted that it is very likely that there is a bubonic plague outbreak imminent in Los Angeles, and that it is running rampant through the homeless there. Right now, this isn't true. This isn't actually happening. This is just his opinion. Well, this has been circulated as fact for a very long time now. This is the source. This is
Wow.
Dr. Drew Pinsky saying that in his opinion this is a thing.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
the reality of bubonic plague is every single state has cases of bubonic plague. They're in the ground squirrels, they're in the chipmunks, they're in things like that, carried by fleas. And so
Well, and that's why Dr. Misha Griffin called for the execution of all chipmunks and the mass
precisely.
genocide of. Okay, okay, she didn't. She didn't. That's fake. She didn't do
That
it.
is
She's a
fake news.
friend of the show. If you watch one of our last episode where she was on, we were talking about this. We were talking about bubonic plague. She mentioned that, and I said that's what she said. She didn't say that.
Right.
Let's nip that one in the bud before that joke gets out of hand.
And Bullinator in the chat has actually pointed out that, like, I would say easily 60, 70, maybe even 80% of the Florida man stories completely made up. So, but this is now, I see this story not just retweeted, right? But
Mhm.
it will come up as a stated fact in other stories. They're like, oh, look, California, all the problems they're having. Homeless are pooping in the streets, which, I mean, they really believe that, San Francisco is just covered in homeless poop. And, bubonic plague is about to break out in California. In fact, usually they don't even say about to break out. Most people are now saying there is actually a problem with bubonic plague in Los Angeles. It's it's mind-boggling.
That That is stunning. I'm going to segue into something in
Mhm.
an ancillary way. Do you know who Dr. Laura is?
Dr. Laura doesn't ring a bell.
Uh, Dr. Laura Ingram.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so sh- just like Drew Pinsky, she's a doctor. Now, Drew, I really do. I like Drew. I trust Drew. I don't know how this happened, if he was actually opining or if he was sitting there saying, yeah, this is really going to happen. I'm a doctor. Listen to me. Dr. Laura Ingram gives a lot of advice on marriages and on she does counseling. She has a show on. She's done some political punditry now recently, but she's a Christian. She's a conservative, so all of her counseling, psychological advice, all skews in that area. You are aware what she's a doctor of?
No.
Sports medicine.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my god. Yeah,
She's a
that
doctor of sports medicine, but she goes by Dr. Laura on her
Oh
show. That's what it's
wow.
the Dr. Laura show. And people call in every now and then. Somebody will slip through the call screening and suggest that perhaps because on that show she's going by Dr. Laura, people would think that the doctorate applies to the field that they are discussing on that show, and maybe it's disingenuous. And she basically says, no, nobody's confused. My credentials are on. Yeah, but her credentials are Dr. Laura, Dr. Laura, Dr. Laura, Dr. Laura, Dr. Laura,
Mhm.
bio, Doctor of Sports Medicine
Dr.
in a
Phil does
font
the same damn
size.
thing.
What? What's Dr. Phil a doctor of?
I don't think he actually is a doctor. I think he's like a doctor. He has his doctorate in something like engineering or some dumb shit like that.
Oh, Jesus.
I have to look it up. I don't want to
Oh, you know
spread.
what? I said Dr. Laura Ingram. I think I meant Dr. Laura Schlesinger. It's Dr. Laura Schlesinger.
Okay,
I think
Laura
I
Schlesinger. Okay, there we go.
Laura Schlesinger. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, okay.
And I said Laura Ingram. Yeah, I did confuse that. It's Dr. Laura Schlesinger. I'm going to double check that on Google right now. don't want to right out of the gate. I'm committing slander and libel on the show and all this other good stuff. But it's not libel. I know it's not written. Nobody give me a hard
Okay.
time. It's too early
Apparently,
in the
he
morning.
does actually hold a doctorate in clinical psychology, but he is not licensed to practice.
Okay.
So there you go.
All right. So let me just I'm going to quickly Dr. Laura Schlesinger. I am
Yeah, let's
Googling her
see.
now, and I got to tell you, I'm pretty sure it's the Dr. Laura program. Usually covers uh, psychology and uh, counseling, all these other things. And I want to just double check, but if memory serves, her degree is in sports medicine.
I mean, they do this kind of thing all the time where someone's just
Yeah,
a
it's sports
doctor
medicine.
this. There you go. There you go.
Yeah. So yeah, and I this isn't to say that Dr. Drew is necessarily deliberately misrepresenting his credentials, but certainly also let's just give him for a minute the maximal charity possible
Hmm.
that he didn't intend for this. Anyone who wants to retweet this information and make a big story out of it says Dr. Drew says this, even if he's not saying it as a doctor in his
Right.
capacity as a doctor in his, and he may well. This is not to say he did. I don't know the details, but I think you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
There's so
Most
many places.
And most people don't even quote this as a Dr. Drew quote. They just quote this as this is now a fact of California. This is now a fact of Los Angeles. You know what I mean? It has just become, particularly in more right leaning circles, a just, oh, well, it's a known fact, you know? And so anytime, and the thing is because of the nature of the claim, you can't prove that there is no bubonic plague among the homeless in California because there's no studies looking to disprove that, to debunk the claim. All you can do is lead back and say, look, it was never, there is no fact here. This is just Dr. Drew claiming. Well, how do you know he doesn't know? Well, I can't tell you he doesn't, but I can tell you that, you know what I mean? The claim he's making isn't backed up by anything. And that's all you can
Yeah.
do.
Yep. No, it's well, and you end up getting it's what is it? The Twain quote? The truth. Sorry, a lie can get twice around the world, while the truth is still lacing up its shoes.
Oh, there you go.
All
All
right.
right.
So what's next?
All right, let's see. So the next one is, this is a common one on the blog, and we don't have to spend much time, but it says California bans restaurants from giving out plastic straws. Now, this is one of the more accurate blogs, and this is already inaccurate. Most people think that California has banned plastic straws, and you get all these memes of, oh, this is now illicit, material and stuff like that. No, one county, and I believe one other city in California, put in a ban that basically makes it so that restaurants don't give out plastic straws. Right now, it doesn't mean you can't still get plastic straws other places. Doesn't mean they don't have straws. It just means they're not using plastic straws.
Yep.
Only in restaurants. Only in restaurants. Now, what's funny about this is years ago, I believe it's oh, what city is it? It's a it's a city in Washington. They actually did ban plastic straws wholesale, right? Nobody said anything
Yep.
about it. But the narrative is that, and this ties heavily into it. It's what people want to believe. People want to believe that California is this super liberal, damn near socialist, you know what I mean, authoritarian state, and so they want to believe that California has bought these, has banned these plastic straws. And then it's usually followed by, oh, but look, China's the real producer of plastic waste in the ocean. So
Oh,
why are we trying to do anything?
the yeah. Well, and the straws. Oh God, there's so much. And then they started doing the straws. The other thing was, um, okay, sorry, I'm just trying to catch that headline. So I don't know what to do. The straws, we talked about this when we did our show on global warming. Straws are actually a legit problem. They are a
Hmm.
very serious problem. A huge amount of the waste, plastic waste, that is actually causing serious harm to our environment. A huge amount of that waste is um, coming from plastic straws because we consume a huge number of them and they're
Hmm.
disposable. So you don't think about it. But how many straws do you use and then just toss, in a week?
Yes, and the way they
Just
break down creates microplastics rather quickly. And let me tell you something else that's really interesting. I was reading an article just the other day, and microplastics have now been found in children here in California. The microplastics have now gone beyond just making their way into the ocean and screwing up sea life. They are starting to find their way back into the system, back into our food chain, and they are ending up in people. And this is a real significant problem.
I honestly wouldn't have thought of that. I hadn't heard of that, but it makes sense. And we had a similar I mean, this is exactly what happened with lead. Um, lead lead was in paint because it makes the colors come out so much more beautifully. Lead really
Oh yeah,
works. It's the reason why, and they still put cadmium in paint in
lead and
China,
crystal.
and yeah, and they try to get that through when on occasion, and this is where, again, for people who sit there and say, well, we shouldn't regulate things from, I'd like to not have cadmium in my paint. I appreciate that the red is a little more beautiful, but I'd rather live. Um, so, but people didn't understand what that was doing to us, what the heavy metal actually did, because it would break down off the paints and it would eventually get into your system. And it is so bad.
I'm going to
It's
make a
insane.
case for regulation when it comes to lead right now. In the
Oh,
19
you Nazi.
yeah,
Sorry. You hadn't even made the case, had you? Sorry.
yeah, you know.
Yeah.
So back in the 1950s,
Mhm.
much like with smoking, we had already discovered scientifically that lead was dangerous, lead was bad, right? We knew the health problems, or at least we knew that there were health problems and what some of those health problems were. You can find there's a collector who was showing off this really interesting piece of history. It was a lead candy dish from the 1950s, and this candy dish was given to schools with an entire thing about how great lead-based paint is, and make sure that
Oh.
your all of your kids get to use lead-based paint.
Oh,
And they're
Jesus.
literally giving school teachers lead candy dishes for kids to eat candy out of. So if you say we don't need regulation, I say, fuck off. I'm sorry.
Well,
That's just, yeah.
same thing with the cigarettes. The cigarettes
Hmm.
commercials were done by doctors. Doctors did the commercials saying, "Oh, they're soothing and relaxing, and you should have them." And what was it? They tried to use cigarettes. Cigarettes were thought of actually as a thought by doctors to be medicinal in that it loosened the throat, and you could, if you were ready to give a big speech, you should, smoke some cigarettes before doing it to loosen the throat. uh,
Okay, so someone's complaining about paper straws. Well, let me tell you something. You can buy a metal straw like this on Amazon for nothing. I just have one of these in my car. And when I go to a fast food place, all I do is I say, "No straw, please." And they don't hand me a straw, and I just use one of these. Simple.
my wife converted the whole family to the metal straws. She got these
Hmm.
really nice chrome looking ones. I honestly, I'm maybe it's a guilty pleasure. I'm like, I want the straw, even if it's paper. I'll take the straw. Those hurt my teeth. I hit my teeth on them. I was like, ow.
Really?
I,
You're
yeah,
not
I
supposed to
don't know when I put it
bite
in
the
my
straw. You're supposed to
bad.
suck. I think
Thanks,
you
Ansgar.
might need
But
some sucking lessons because you're not supposed to use your
uh,
teeth.
Ansgar, you're on the show with me. I have enough lessons on sucking. Thank you.
Oh, ouch. Oh, oh,
That
that
was
was
a
a
little
good
low, but
one.
what can I,
Ooh,
so it was yeah,
that
I couldn't
stings a
not. I'm
little.
sorry. Well, I'm a bad man. I'm sorry. I was just
Okay.
that was just too well set up.
Someone
I'm sorry.
asks
I'm
how to
sorry.
clean a metal straw. See, they invented these things back in the
See,
1800s,
they invented.
and they're called pipe cleaners. And what they are is a wire with brushes on it that you push through any kind of a pipe-like object, like a straw, and it cleans it out. And I believe they invented soap sometime in the 1400s. So you're good,
Oh,
man.
oh,
You're good.
I retract my apology. This is why this is why he needs. Okay, hold on. Who was it who said it? If yeah, okay. Was it somebody? Was it a patron? If it's somebody who gives us money, I'm siding with them. If it's not, I'll
Snow
side
dog,
with
snow dog.
Snow Dog. Okay.
Okay. All right. So let's go to our next story here. So the next one here, this is one of the most prevalent ones that I've been wanting to cover for a long, long time. This is seriously in the public consciousness that California has legalized the willing spreading of HIV and donating of HIV blood. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so this is based on some grain of truth. California repealed a law that was um, put into practice during the AIDS scare epidemic, right? When everyone was scared. And that law basically did things like, let's say that you had HIV and you accidentally gave it to your wife, right?
Yep.
You're going to jail. Let's say you did
Yes.
not know that you had HIV and you donated blood and it somehow got through the screening process. You're
Yep.
going to jail, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Now, what this did was it repealed that. But the way I try to describe to people is imagine that that you stab somebody with a knife. Do you require a special law that says you are not allowed to stab people with a knife? Or do you just charge them with murder or attempted murder? Or if you were negligent with the knife, do you charge them with, criminal negligence? You know what I mean? So
Mm.
it's not like if I go and I willfully give somebody HIV, I won't be charged. There's just not this mandatory minimum anymore, other than whatever minimum of what I did. And there isn't a special charge that says you specifically gave somebody HIV, so you're also going to jail for that.
Yeah. And regardless of intent is the problem with again that mandatory minimum. It doesn't matter whether you even yeah.
Yeah.
It could have been deliberate, accidental. You maybe didn't even know you were infected. It actually reminds me a little bit of, and this was actually this was before the time of bloggers, but it was a gross misrepresentation of
Mm.
the law, which was where during Prohibition, the U.S. government was poisoning alcohol and was poisoning people who would drink alcohol,
Oh
and they
my
were dying
God.
from it. Well, it's true. It's absolutely true, but it's true in the same way that this is true,
Mm-hmm.
which was um, alcohol. What they were doing was they were poisoning. First of all, they were deliberately they were deliberately poisoning. Um, they had been poisoning rubbing alcohol and well, rubbing alcohol is usually already poison, but they were poisoning alcohol that had been being used for medicinal purposes
Mm-hmm.
or for any other purpose that was now being taken illegally and drunk. They were also advertising the fact that they had done this. So, they were sitting there saying, we have told people who produce alcohol to increase the amount of certain toxic or toxins in it so that people will not drink it because it's now all poisonous. So all alcohol essentially became is it wood grain alcohol or it's whatever the the alcohol that'll
Mm-hmm.
basically make you blind and or kill you. They deliberately did this to discourage people from drinking it. The word either didn't get out, people didn't understand that this was a problem, and people who were drinking illegal alcohol started going either blind and or just dying.
Oh wow.
And it was because they were being poisoned. Again, deliberately. The government wasn't hiding it though, and the government wasn't sitting there trying to kill people, it was trying to get people to stop drinking. Stopping drinking was another interesting issue, and I'll get back to the topic, but
Mhm.
just for World War II buffs, World War II, Soviet airplanes start crashing, and nobody knows why. Nobody has any idea why, but it's a serious problem because you need your airplanes during a war. Planes just crash, and they're trying to land, they crash. They're trying to land, they crash. It's always during landing. Nobody can figure out why.
Mhm.
Then they figured it out. They had started prohibition,
Mhm.
and in a desperate bid to find alcohol, the technicians working on the planes were cutting into the brake lines, and drinking the fluid because it was alcoholic.
Oh no.
And that's where they were getting their alcohol from. And they were trying to not, they weren't bleeding them completely dry. They were bleeding them enough they thought it was safe, but in many cases it wasn't, and the planes would crash. So, in order to win the war, Soviet Russia has to repeal prohibition so that people stop drinking the brake lines and the planes can fly now.
That's a
Uh,
that's an awesome story.
yeah, thank you. And it's work it backwards to unravel that spool. Um, People who want to drink alcohol are going to find a way to drink alcohol. If you're trying to make it illegal, the government said best way to do it is just make it so alcohol will kill you. And that was the other thing that was floated. If you make the brake lines poisonous, people won't drink them. But that's how bad it is. That's how, and especially when you got alcoholics and you got people, if they want to drink the alcohol, they'll find a way.
Yeah.
The government said we will poison the alcohol so people don't do it. But the only way this plan works is if they tell everybody. You know what I mean? They didn't want to kill people. They're just sitting there going, okay, alcohol, we've told all the manufacturers of any kind of alcohol for any use, medicinal, whatever, make it poisonous. It was done by law, and then the word got out the U.S. is trying to murder its citizens.
That's wow. That's it's convoluted, but it kind of shows you how
Yeah,
improper reporting just distorts everything, and it's dangerous actually.
I, I,
So
I have one more story, but let's finish this one. And I got one I wanted to jump to
yeah,
actually.
yeah, Casey. I just wanted
Yep,
to touch on some comments about the story. Casey
please.
Atheist said that someone on pre meds can't get infected. Actually, is how I should say it. They're saying basically meds make it impossible to transfer HIV to your partner. From what I understand, yes.
For
Here's a
the
general.
prophylactic. Yeah.
Yeah, in general, HIV is one of those things where it's no longer a death sentence. Um, in fact, with the right medications, you can keep your viral count so low that you don't ever actually get HIV. I mean, you don't ever get AIDS, even though you have the HIV virus. In fact, they can keep it so low it's undetectable in the bloodstream. You will pass an HIV test. Um, yeah, it's absolutely not a death sentence if you take care of yourself, which is a good thing. Somebody else said California still sucks. That's Darth Chaz one. Well, you can hate the state. I mean, there's things I hate about the state. There's things I hate about every state. But you don't need to lie about it to hate it. You know, you can
Yeah,
just
there's so much stuff to hate about it. Really, you don't need to invent anything, I
you
think is what
don't.
Ansgar's trying to say.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
no. I
I
feel that
hate.
way, but I think
Mhm.
Bull said something about Florida. I was just like, yeah, I try not to pigeonhole. Florida and Texas are my two trigger states. I'm just like,
Fair enough. So, what was your story?
oh, I had two. They're both kind of related. Now, this isn't from bloggers. This is from regular media, actually, but it's important because it has to do with how the media may take shortcuts to try to make the news more digestible, cut out nuance, which is critical and ends up undermining
Mhm.
important activities later. The first I want to cover is with global warming. Now, when in the 70s, two separate processes were found, one that was causing the Earth to warm, one that was causing the Earth to cool. The question was, which one would be stronger than the other, or were they in perfect balance? Nobody knew. Nobody understood the process. But when the cooling process was discovered, they said, "Wow, the Earth is cooling." Now, this isn't what scientists said. What they said was they found a process that would cause the Earth to cool, but they weren't sure if other processes would cause it to warm faster. The science wasn't in. All they found was there was, in fact, a cooling process, which, by the way, there has to be, or else we would. I mean, if heat wasn't escaping, if there weren't ways in which the Earth was cooling itself, this would be, this would be Venus right now. So it is cooling. And the question is, which process is bigger? But this was spun as scientists have concluded that the Earth is cooling. That wasn't what they said. It was close to what they said, but not quite. But the problem was, I remember during the 80s and 90s, it started to come out that global warming might be real. It might be a big thing.
Mhm.
And a lot of people who lived back in that time and remember the news from the 70s and 80s sat there and said, "Oh God, scientists said it was cooling. Now it's warming. Then it's cooling. Why don't they make up their mind?" They never said that, but the news reported it that way.
Mhm.
And there's a very similar thing. It's interesting. My wife is a biochemist, so I get all the latest scientific journals, and I um, can read them. She often explains them to me because sometimes I don't get all the language in there, and I don't also always want to read them.
By the way,
But
we could do an
um,
entire show on science reporting if we really wanted to, because it's bad.
that, it is. We probably should. Um,
Mhm.
but what happened was a study had come out that said that wine does, in fact, especially red wine, can relax the heart and has some positive influence on the heart. The net result of the science reporting, I remember the day this broke, because I read the article before it was reported on, and it was reported on by major news organizations, CNN, ABC, CBS, what you'd consider to be reliable and not even partisan, like cable networks. They said scientists determined that wine is good for you.
I
That's
remember
not
that.
what they found. And then shortly thereafter, they found no, alcohol really isn't good for you. And then recently they found that there is no such thing as a safe amount of alcohol. That is the current consensus. And I still have people who sit there and when I get into, I do some anti-theistic work. And when I talk to people about science, they say, well, why can't scientists ever get their story straight? They keep changing it. Uh-uh-uh. They haven't
No.
changed it on that. The reporting has changed. How it was framed was changed. But it undermines people's belief in science because people believe the reporting when it first says scientists found that alcohol is good for your heart.
I
No, they
I can
found a
guarantee
couple of,
you almost all articles that start with scientists found probably bullshit.
yeah,
Yeah.
and probably reasonably close.
Mhm.
But and that's the other thing, which is I can't tell you how many times I've read a paper and it was a corollary paper and explicitly says we have found a correlation,
Yeah.
and it gets reported in the news. Oh, we found that alcohol causes low blood pressure and is good for you. We found that alcohol, this causes that, whatever it is,
Mhm.
chocolate causes. No, they found a correlation. There's no way to know. And I think we've discussed correlation versus causality here. But okay, chocolate and depression. People, they've said, okay, they found that at one point they said chocolate causes depression. Why? Because people who are depressed eat a lot of chocolate. Therefore, clearly the chocolate is causing, and they're like, no, it's got cannabinoids and it's actually making them feel better. That's why they're eating
Mhm.
it. But originally it was said, well, we've noticed that everybody who's depressed eats lots of chocolate. Must be that the chocolate's the problem. It's not. It was
Yeah.
actually part of the solution.
But
But
recently they found a correlation between men who drink large amounts of coffee. I think it's like more than 6 cups a day, and being able to survive, more likely survive or higher survival rates of male related cancers. Now, does that mean that coffee is causing men to survive cancer? No. But it is a strong correlation that it could be that the coffee is causing it.
I'm gonna get some more. I'm gonna get some more coffee.
Huh.
I'm gonna. When my wife says you're drinking too much coffee, I'm gonna say Dr. Ansgar said I need more.
That's right, Dr. On.
Do you?
I'm
Do you
changing
love
my
me,
name,
honey?
my first name to Doctor, and my last name to Ansgar, so I can just go by Doctor Ansgar, and everyone's just gotta.
Oh my God, you totally could get away with that. Well,
Mm-hmm.
and actually you can, but most people don't realize is there's no real restriction on name changes. The very first one I met a performer. He was a magician, and he went by the Rogue. That was his stage name. But what was interesting was that was his legal name too. Just so that he could sign all the checks and the paperwork, he had his name legally changed to the
Oh yeah.
Rogue. So his first name was the. And it was funny because I remember meeting him. I was like, "So, what do I call you? Do I feel strange calling you the?" It's like, "Oh yeah, talk to the about
Yeah,
this."
yeah.
I was like, "Yeah, well, the is over there." And he was not very sympathetic. He's like, "Yeah, call me whatever you like." I was just like, "No, this is a real problem, dude." Now we've got pronouns. We've got I don't know, but yeah. So I'm gonna change the name to Doctor. I like that.
In fact, if you change your name for business reasons, it's actually one of the easiest ways to be granted a swift name change. So, if for business reasons I need to be Doctor Ansgar, I can get that done real quick.
I like that. I like well, my wife is a doctor, so it's sort of like I don't like being. And actually, my wife is basically every member of my family is. I am one of the least educated members of my family, so it's sort of like I need to get that doctor, man, and I'll do just about anything to do. Well, not okay. When I say do just about anything to like become a doctor, that's excluding hard work. That's off the table. So I won't study. I won't memorize anything. I won't learn anything short of that to become a doctor. I'm totally on board.
Kitty says you don't trust him to be at fault for all the tech issues, yet you trust him with your health. uh,
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 yeah. Okay. 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 Yeah.
okay,
She's
what's
maybe
your
got a
what's your
point, but
next story?
well, no. Actually, those were the two.
Okay.
The two were global warming and wine. So they were both science related, and in both
Yeah.
cases, and just to reiterate, what ended up happening was it undermined people's confidence in science because they thought scientists were making certain claims they never made and that they explicitly avoided for just those reasons that ended up panning out in the end. But the reporting, in order to make it, the reporters figure nobody's going to understand the difference between corollary, causal. Nobody's going to want to hear that, well, okay, we found that wine is good for the heart in this respect. It doesn't mean it's a net good, net positive. Nobody wants
Right.
to do any of that nuance. They report it blankly that way, and then
And
poof,
for very
when
specific people with very specific conditions, because the heart,
yes,
it does very specific good things for the heart, that might be a net positive for those specific people. Well, I'm glad you
yep.
actually brought up the climate change again, because that's one of my next stories. And the
Oh,
reason
beautiful.
is that it shows how the web of this crap happens. So, are you familiar with Louder with Crowder, the podcast? Steven
What?
Crowder. You never heard of
No, it
Steven
doesn't sound
Crowder?
familiar.
Okay, Steven Crowder is kind of a right wing podcast. He does news, he does cultural commentary. It's kind of like Joe Rogan, but more right leaning, if that kind of makes sense. And he doesn't necessarily always have on guests and stuff like that. But anyways, he does a lot of climate denial type, content. And what's really interesting is, like, here's one of his big headlines, top 5 climate change myths debunked, and he's going to debunk all the science, supposedly. The problem is that when you follow his sources, it's a blog, right? And then you follow that source's blog, and it's another blog. And then you follow that source's blog, and it's another blog. One of the problems is that many of these blogs just continually quote each other. And so it creates the appearance that this is legitimate news because everybody's saying the same thing. But you'll finally find the source after going through sometimes 10, 20 blogs sometimes. And it's usually, just like we've reported earlier, a cherry-picked little piece of a thing taken out of context and twisted, and by the time it gets to the final blog, it's so twisted out of shape that it's hardly recognizable. There is a YouTuber called Potholer 54, absolute legend, And he does a lot of this debunking, and he will take the time to go through the blog that's quoted the blog, and he will show you every single blog that's quoted a blog to finally get down to the original source and say, okay, I can see what they were trying to say, but here's the reality. And it is amazing how much research you have to be willing to do to debunk this. I mean, just imagine if you or I
Oh,
were trying to do
jeez.
this. We don't have the time to go through,
No.
20 blogs to figure out the source.
Well, and if it's something that appeals to our sense of ego, which, for example, most conspiracy
Mm-hmm.
theories do, because a conspiracy theory necessarily entails that you're smarter than the other people who haven't figured it out.
Yes.
So if it appeals to that, we have an inherent bias and motive towards
Mm-hmm.
believing it, almost no matter how crazy it is. That doesn't mean we will believe it, just a bias towards believing it, so that if it's even remotely plausible, the hand is on the scales towards us believing it. I,
And especially if it's tilted towards further hating something we already hate.
yes, and then that will drop our inhibitions against getting it wrong, and that will drop our that will reduce our tendency to double check and fact check this kind of thing. I remember once, this one was a biggie. First of all, Fox News does do a lot of this, and this is why. So a Fox News pundit will say something. Now they are a pundit; they are not a journalist. And I've had this discussion also with people before where they say, well, Glenn Beck or this person or that person, Bill O'Reilly said these things, and they're on Fox News. I'll actually quote Fox News as a source. I try to do it every time I can. And the reason I do is because usually the people I'm arguing with trust them as a source. So if I can use Fox News, and Fox News will repost Associated Press, they will repost Reuters, especially on the website. Their website's not, well, the front page can be a bit of an issue, but the
Hold on, we have a troll problem. Tony Designs just said he bought a futon to debunk beds. I think we might need to get him out of here.
I keep saying we have to get him out of here, and it never happens.
Sorry.
Well, I don't. Well, no, he's not. Well, no, he's not trolling. What he's trying to do is he's trying to show up the host, because I'm the king of the bad jokes around here, Tony. Wow.
He's right. He's right. He's got the throne and
I do,
everything.
yeah. If there's a good joke, it ain't coming from me, and I don't like the idea that Tony. Well, it's just Tony's just. He's just always. Wait, he'll leave. I don't want him to leave. I want to throw him out. What
That
if he
just
leaves? What's
that
the fun in that?
it's like having a cell phone and hanging up on somebody. There's no satisfaction.
Oh,
Remember
God.
back when you could actually like do one of these and go, oh, I hate you so much. You can't do that with your cell phone.
Yeah, you're not gonna do that with $1,000 phone. Jesus. All right. Well, Tony beat us at us. He volunteered to leave. That just takes all the fun out of. Oh God.
Well,
He's always. Isn't it funny how he comes up almost every stream? I'd like to figure out how that happens.
eh,
He's clearly, it's fake news. He's engineering this somehow. I don't know how. We'll look into it. Maybe he's talking in our producer's ear or something.
he might be.
So oh yeah, so what a pundit will so I'll quote Fox News if I can. Most people don't realize I'm not actually quoting Fox News, because Fox News will republish AP.
Yeah.
So if there's an AP article that I want to show somebody, I don't show it from AP. I go to Fox News, find where they republish the thing, and say, "Oh, here's Fox News." I'm like, "Wow, Fox News said it. It must be true." So this is what I do when I'm talking to Republicans. I was like, "Yeah, it's AP, but." Fox News for just put their label on it, and that's perfectly fine. I don't mind, but but what'll happen is the people who are actual journalists and reporters on Fox News actually usually do a pretty good job. They're not great, but they usually do a pretty good job. But they're credentialed, and they have a level of ethics that they are expected to adhere to, and for the most part stick with. If they're not credentialed, and that includes Bill O'Reilly, Glenn Beck, Hannity, a whole bunch of others, more than half of those are gone now. But if they're not credentialed, they can say just about anything they want to. People think that they're news because they're on Fox News, but it's not news, it's punditry. And then what happens is the news organization can, and sometimes does, if it's a story that they like, say, well, we've heard from a source that, so somebody, Hannity comes out, Obama may be Muslim. He's the first one to say it. Then and this is a hypothetical. I don't know who was the first. No, it was Bachman who was the first one to
Mhm.
float that one. But Hannity says, okay, he may be Muslim. A Fox News reporter can then say, we've heard that, we've been told that because Hannity, the pundit that they know, isn't credentialed to say these things, said it, so they can report on it, and then this is where the term echo chamber comes from. This is literally, they have echo chamber in news. This is where they have literally created the ability to create
They are
their
their
own
own
news.
source.
Yep.
Yeah.
This was interesting because after September 11th, there was the September 11th mosque, which wasn't a mosque, it was a community center, but
Mhm.
there was a community center. It was a Muslim organization that was founding it. It would have a mosque on the premises, but it was not a mosque. It was a community center. And I personally had no objection to it. I completely understood why people would, but I
Certainly.
thought you'd have to push back against that. You'd have to say, listen, we can't be reactionary. Not all Muslims did this. And just that because they were an extremist sect of Islam doesn't mean. But at any rate, you've got the 9/11, you've got the mosque coming up within a block or two of the World Trade Center. And a woman, I've forgotten her name, she ran a media organization, did an ad buy on buses in New York and projected a release date for the mosque of 2020. I think it was 2020 or 2019, September 11th, 2019. So, and it just said 9/11/19 question mark, and then showed an airplane. And then had the name of the mosque, the proposed center, and the address, and all this other stuff. Now, Glenn Beck saw this, and I think he was at CNN at the time, and he said, "We now know that the date that the mosque is going to be opened is on September 11th, 2019, and if they're not trying to cause trouble, why would they open it on that date? Clearly,
Right.
they just want to offend people. They want to hurt people." At the time he said this, the mosque didn't have sufficient funding to even be able to set a date when they would open. All the paperwork had already been filed with the town hall in New York. They had all, and the paperwork was done, and it said the date was to be determined. But best case scenario, they couldn't make that ambitious a timeline. And I say 2019, it couldn't. It was 09 actually. I think it was 09 was so I added I added 10 years to that. That's how old I am. So literally, and I remember I pulled the records. I said, no, this is what it says. And they've never said a date. They've said there isn't a date possible. And it took a tremendous amount of, and there were a number of other people who were, and they finally found the first person to make the claim publicly was Beck. And they finally found where he got the source from. It was a bus. That's it. But he reported it, and then people who didn't want to have the mosque would sit there and say, why would they open it on this date if they're not trying to cause trouble? It's like, they're
Right.
not opening it on that date. Well, Glenn Beck says
Wow.
they are. Well, he's a fucking idiot.
Well, and the thing is once that's in the public consciousness, it's almost
You're done.
impossible to get rid of. Yeah. That's
Goose is
it.
cooked.
Yeah. Oh,
Well,
I do have an interesting question though.
yeah.
Um uh
No, I
um
don't know what medication he's on, but he should go back on it.
now I'm all for allowing the community center and the mosque to open, but I have a question that kind of, with, like, let's say, like, the Christ, or let's say any kind of a thing where, or recently, where that Christian shot up the mosque. I forget it was where it was, but I remember he
Um,
came in and shot up a mosque
uh,
and stuff like that.
yeah, it's where they filmed Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. How appropriate do you think it would be for a Christian-based community center to open across the street with a church?
Well, I think not very appropriate.
Right, right.
But I have two comments to that.
Hmm.
The first is I'm not sure how much the government can really get involved in what's appropriate and what
Right, of
isn't, and if
course
they get the
not. That's why I'm
license.
saying it shouldn't be illegal. I'm just,
Yeah.
discussing the morality. I guess
Oh,
not even the
okay.
morality, the ethics.
and then I think the second thing is it depends on really what their intention is and
Hmm.
how and what they're going to have to do with it. If their intention, if let's say that they had scheduled it beforehand,
Right.
they now have a problem. If they are genuine people and sensitive people and they really care about the community, they have to recognize that if they're going to stay there, they have a much higher burden than they would have otherwise, and that they need to reach out to people. The reverse is true too, which is if you're in that community, you have to realize you have to go to them and say, there's going to be a lot of concerns here. How do we find a way to mitigate those concerns so that we can
Right.
all work together? Now, this was done when there was I think it was, I'm trying to remember, there was a shooting a while back. I think it was in a Jewish community, and they had reached out to a local mosque, and all the members of the mosque actually went to the temple. They had and the temple had invited them in, and they all, and it was just this sort of violence hurts everybody, and we can all agree on that, and they were honored guests there
Right.
for this. So, and to see that happen, so if it's done right, it can be cathartic, it can help build ties in and can be a powerful thing. But you have to realize, as the one who's making the Christian church or center or whatever it is, you have to realize the onus is going to be on you. That's not fair, but that's what's happened. Life isn't fair, and either you pick a different spot or you realize you've got your work cut out for you there.
Yeah. Okay, no, I like that answer. I think that would apply to anybody doing something like that. You've got your work cut out for you to prove that you're you're there with good intentions, because it
Well,
does feel
it's not just
intimidating.
prove it, but you've got the responsibility now to actually be and we
Hmm.
talked about Martin Luther King Jr. I finally got a frame. Finally got a frame.
Oh, really? Nice.
I did.
Nice.
Haven't put it in yet. So Ansgar, I'll tell everyone what I'm talking about in a second, but I finally got, that's how friggin' big it is. Um,
Wow.
but Martin Luther King Jr., one of the things is if you were gonna, if listen, if you were black in this country back then, you unfortunately, through no faults of your own, and it isn't fair,
Hmm.
but if you want to try to heal tensions, if you want to try to make things better, you have a responsibility to behave better than everybody else, because the slightest fuck up you do is going to be taken, and it's not fair. And it's not a
Not fair.
responsibility, by the way, that's you don't have that in a moral sense. I just mean if you're going to sit there and try to, if you're going
Tactically.
to be an activist and you're going to try to make things better, you have to be above reproach. There's no other way to do it. Anyone else can. And there's this amazing picture of Barack Obama if he were white. We should get that and put that out. In fact, I wish I'd had that. We could have put that in here. I wish I'd thought of it. I could do that for our next postcard. It's a stunning picture. Whoever did it did a spectacular job. It's Barack Obama, but he's white. It's
Hmm.
not just the skin change. I mean, there's just enough subtle change in the features that he really just seems, European.
Hmm.
And they're like, okay, if this is who would have been running for America, for you know president at the time, he wouldn't have had to do. Take a look at all the bars that he cleared.
Yeah.
No sex scandals, no bribery, no nothing. The man that
The
the
standards would
only
have been
man that
much
could be
lower. Yeah.
the only man that could have been elected and be black was Barack Obama, because he was perfect. Basically, this is just completely squeaky clean.
Hmm.
If it's a white guy, it can be Trump.
Yeah.
But I think I sort of lost the thread. Yeah, so it's not fair to the community centers. It's not fair to the people who are trying to be advocates. But if you're trying to
It's
be an
just a
advocate
reality.
and it's something against some of that kind of oppression. I have two on my wall. I have two pictures. One is of Christopher Hitchens, who
Hmm.
is one of my role models, but my biggest role model in my life since I was 8 years old has been Martin Luther King Jr. And
We
so I
talked a
had a picture
little
of
bit about
that.
that with May and Sarah on our show about trans activism and how it is
Yes, we
unfair.
did.
But if you're going to be a trans activist, you have to be. You can't fuck up. You because
And he's
anything you do is reflected onto trans as a whole. You know.
is reflected on everybody. And if you do one thing, that's why the people like Jenna, what is the whatever her name?
Yaniv, Jessica Yaniv.
Oh Jesus!
Yeah, yeah,
One of those undoes the work of 10 genuine, caring, educated, smart, loving trans activists
yeah.
who are doing good work.
It's
It,
sad but
it, it,
true.
you're you're screwed by an order of 10 to 1.
Hmm.
So yeah. So anyways, I finally got my picture of Martin Luther King Jr. had to come out of the frame. So
Awesome.
I've had that down, and I kind of want to put it actually back there where it's on the streams, but then it looks like virtue signaling. Ooh, I've got a picture of Martin Luther King Jr. and then I also can't see it. So we'll see.
So this is my next story. Now, this one actually, while I was preparing for this, one of the people I follow and follows me, we've been friends for a long time, retweeted this as a true story. Now, where did this come from? Now, first of all, the story is Twitter changes terms of service to allow explicit photos of children and pedophile content. Okay? They're saying that they're going to start allowing nude pictures of children and pedophile content and things like that. They've got a
Jesus.
picture of this guy with the NAMBLA symbol underneath. Now, where is the source? Well, the source comes from a place called Loomer.com. In other words, Laura Loomer. And what's really funny about this one is, first of all, the story that this, if you do a reverse image search, the story that this image comes from is actually about a drag queen that tells stories to children. Okay, that's for the picture, and they've got him posted with the NAMBLA. Now, for people who don't know what NAMBLA is,
Wow.
they are an organization that literally advocates that older men should be allowed to have sex with young boys legally.
North American Man Boy Love Association.
Yes.
Don't ask how I knew that.
Probably from South Park, to be honest.
Yeah.
Most of us,
Oh
that's how
yeah,
we found out.
it's
Yeah.
inside. Well, no, the reality is,
Yeah.
well,
It's
you
been
knew
around
it
a
too.
while.
It's been around a while, and if you deal with um, social issues, eventually you're going to have to cope with the fact that this group exists and is very proud of what they do.
Yes. Yes.
This is not a good group.
And so to even associate this person in this picture with that logo is already like red flags.
Yeah.
And the next thing is I read through this entire thing, and there's a lot of they're going to do this, there's going to do that, and not a single source. Not one. The only sources they quote is they show a people who have said nasty things about pedophiles, right? Who have gotten tweets taken down. That's their entire source. What's worse is I confronted my friend about this. Like, look, there's no
Mhm.
sources. Well, I don't doubt that this, it wouldn't surprise me if it's true. Well,
Oh my God.
but there's no source. There's no source. They just have whatever. They're preying on you want to believe bad things about Twitter, and so it's easy. Well, good for them. Are are you kidding me? And now, because this tweet is out there, I'm seeing 40, 50 people responding to this as if it were true, because most people, they just read a headline and just assume it's true. But this is just a blog, no source, and here's the problem. Could Twitter be doing this? Certainly. I can't prove they're not doing this, but all I can prove is there's no frickin' source. None.
Um, the Daily Show, Jon Stewart did a excellent piece on, and I think we're going to get into. I get certain kinds of fake media I get kind of triggered by, and we may end up bringing up one of those bloggers a little later on. But the other one is, people like, especially people who are bullies with it.
Mhm.
I cannot abide bullies in that sense. But one of the interesting things was, four Duke lacrosse students were accused of rape. They were accused of raping a black woman at a party. Now, there were immediately some problems with the story, but uh, everybody railroaded these guys, and they ended up getting kicked off the team. I think they probably were told to leave the school too, if I recall. Their lives were utterly destroyed. And the fact that they were the ones who were being accused was made public. And Fox News jumped on this, and especially Nancy Grace. Now, Nancy Grace says she's a former prosecutor. I haven't looked into her credentials. I don't know what it is, but she is belligerent like a prosecutor, but doesn't have quite the integrity I would normally expect of a prosecutor. Now, she doesn't have to. She's a pundit once again, but she railroaded these boys like there was no tomorrow, and would say things that anybody with a brain would realize why it's a problem. She said, for example, well, if they're innocent, why did the university kick them out?
Oh yeah,
She
where
made
the
that.
punishment becomes evidence of the crime. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Well, and it wasn't even the punishment. They were because of the accusations why they get kicked out. I think that's arguable what you as a school does, because ostensibly they're innocent until proven guilty. Now, that's not a private standard, so the school can kick them out, and if the school's concerned for the safety of the students. But on the flip side, what about these four? What ended up happening was the evidence got stronger and stronger and stronger, actually. And it wasn't until somebody, as I recall it, the DA's office flipped and said, actually, we have exculpatory evidence. We know for a fact they're innocent. And we have a prosecutor who just basically had tied his entire career to prosecuting these guys. And the evidence wasn't getting stronger and stronger and stronger. He was making it up more and more and more. These boys were not found not guilty, which is a standard. It just means we can't prove they did it. We don't
right.
know they did it. They were found innocent. It was completely exculpatory. They didn't do it. Period. End of discussion. And they were completely exonerated. And Nancy Grace had just been absolutely brutal to these boys. And now Jon Stewart does a great thing. If you look up Duke Lacrosse, Nancy Grace, because she keeps talking about how impartial she is, and then like somebody
Mhm.
comes on her show, a former prosecutor, and he says, well, look, I've been looking at the evidence, and if nothing else, there's reasonable doubt. I don't see how they can be convicted. And she literally says, reasonable doubt? Well, gee, why don't we all go back to Nazi Germany, where the trial is decided before, or sorry, their guilt or innocence is decided before the trial. And I'm sitting there going,
Are you
and
saying due process is Nazi-esque?
that's what Jon Stewart pointed out. I was like, yeah, because if anybody had a hard on for reasonable doubt, it was Hitler. Um,
Uh,
and
uh,
But look at the framing of that. Listen to the frame, because it almost
yeah.
sounds reasonable. If you're not paying attention, it's like, yeah, wait a minute, who are we to decide guilt or innocence before the trial? No, she's the one deciding guilt or innocence before the trial. And anyone who's trying to say, hey, let's wait and just look at it, he didn't even say they weren't guilty. What he said was, in my expert opinion, there is reasonable doubt and you cannot convict. That's what he said. She flipped out on him.
And you know what
These
was
boys
said
had their lives destroyed.
after it was found they were innocent? People
What?
said, well, it started a conversation.
Yeah.
So fucking what? You destroyed these people's lives.
And a lot of people, every now and then, if I say, and I've forgotten their names, but you could still drop the name of one or two of them.
Yeah.
And all people remember is that they were accused. Nobody remembers that they were exonerated. Nobody remembers that part. Nobody
Yeah.
remembers the DA either. Everybody, and when I said the Duke Lacrosse, you knew who I was talking about. But the DA who should go to jail for the rest of his life for that.
Yeah.
And I actually mean that, and the reason is because I firmly believe, I think cops should be paid more. I think lawyers should be paid more. I think all these people should be paid more, but they also should be held to a higher standard. If you use your office to violate the code of violate your role as an officer of the court, your punishment should be significantly stronger. It is a position of trust, and if you violate that trust, it's a serious problem.
Agreed. In fact, I think in general, we should be holding anyone who's given power to a higher standard, and we should be punishing anyone who is given power more harshly when they abuse that power.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. No,
It's
I'm
not the
with you.
same thing when you're in power and you abuse it. If you're a police officer and you use your position, and by the way, I don't mean that outside of the line of duty either. If you're a police officer
Hmm.
and you have a side business, and in that side business you commit fraud, you should be treated like everybody else. If, as a police officer, you commit fraud and you use your role as a police officer to assist in that, then it's a much bigger problem. Then it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. The abuse of that trust is a very different thing.
Yes, agreed. I think we've disagreed on a few things. That's not one that we're going to.
You and I agree on far more than we disagree on. Our
True.
disagreements are and our disagreements usually are only on sort of methods
Yeah, it's
about
on the
stuff.
minutia kind of. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
I think that's actually what where a healthy democracy is supposed to be. Like, if you look at let's say the climate change thing, right?
mm,
In my mind, the perfect democracy would be the right saying these are okay, we recognize as a problem, you recognize as a problem, these are the solutions that we think will benefit the most people, and the left should be saying no, these are the solutions we think should be benefiting the most people. And then when they go back and forth and say no, but see, this is how your solution hurts these people, and no, this is how your solution hurts these people, and they finally come to a compromise that actually genuinely benefits the most people and does the most good. That's a healthy democracy in my mind, but we're far from that.
so I wanted to. We've had a couple of. I've been involved in a couple of discussions, and I realized I restarted my computer, so I don't have this up. I'm going to quickly bring up a document, but there was. We haven't covered bloggers too much. We've sort of been going around it. Bloggers are, I think, a big piece of this. Um, there's a very good question about what constitutes journalism and who gets to decide what journalism is. And I've had this conversation with a few people who consider themselves journalists, whether they are or not, I don't know. I haven't always gone into their credentials. But do you? What makes a journalist?
Oh, that
I
is a damn good question.
Yeah,
Where do we
and the
draw the line
problem,
between blogger and journalist?
yeah. I think that's a very good, and there are some legal definitions, but the legal definitions in many cases are for the law. So, for example, in the U.S., journalists have certain protections that other free speech does not have. They are not insulated against defamation. In fact, they have certain extra liabilities in some cases. But in most cases, they have extra protections because of the First Amendment and freedom of it's not just free speech, but it is specifically freedom of the press. If you are a journalist, you have certain extra protections. That went to the Supreme Court as to how far it extends, and it was decided that basically anybody who was giving any opinion on any subject that was published publicly essentially constituted a journalist for
Jesus.
all intents and purposes. So by the American legal definition, just in a legal sense, those journalistic protections apply to just about everybody. That doesn't mean in just sort of an everyday sense everybody's a journalist,
Hmm.
but it does mean in a legal sense just about everybody has those protections. Now, I've seen that used as a, well, gee, the law defines journalist as anybody who publishes in any public forum for the most part.
Let me debunk the idea of the law defining what a thing is. So, would you agree that if a woman, let's say, captures a man, holds a knife to his throat, forces Viagra down him, and has sex with him, that would be rape?
Would I agree that that's rape? Yes.
Okay, in most countries in the world, it is not. In most countries in the world, legally defined, it must be penetration with a penis by a man to a woman.
Well, what constitutes a human being? We've got a normal number of laws. We've always had laws that say what constitutes a human being.
Yeah.
200 years ago, what constitutes an adult? 200 years ago, it was a boy aged 12 or older, and that was it. Not women.
Yeah.
Women, there was no such thing as an adult woman. When you say that an adult could have a firearm, you were not speaking about women. You also weren't speaking about anyone of color. No, off the table. You were speaking a 12-year-old or higher. That was by law.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think there's some issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
The American Press Institute defines journalism as well, journalism is the activity of gathering, assessing, creating, and presenting news and information. It is also the product of these activities. The other thing I've heard of is I had this defense of journalists, of bloggers as journalists, where if a blogger comes out and says, I'm a journalist, well, gee, the self-identification and the just putting out content is enough. It doesn't matter if the content is accurate. And I pose the hypothetical, okay, if you have someone who is putting out content that is all fabricated, it's all lies,
Mm-hmm.
but they call themselves a journalist. They are on a journalistic platform, which I guess in this case includes Pathos, Medium, or any number of other um, they're web hosts that will pay you for content. That is true, but there's it's not a journalistic, and they're considered web hosts by most online organizations. And if okay, so if you publish to that and everything you say is deliberately a lie, are you still a journalist? And the answer I get by some people is yes, you're just a bad one. No, I think you have to have there has to be a bar of integrity to be called a journalist. But at any rate, journalism can be distinguished from other activities by uh, 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 products by certain identifiable characteristics and practices. These elements not only separate journalism from other forms of communication, they make it what is indispensable to democratic societies. History reveals that um, uh, the more democratic a society, the more news and information it tends to have. It is, while there is a great deal of communication out there, journalism is nonetheless perceived as being more valuable than most of the other stuff out there. That value flows from its purpose, to provide people with verified information they can make use of to make better decisions. And its practices, the most important of which is a systematic process, a discipline of verification that journalists use to try to find not just the facts, but also, quote, truth about the facts. This is the American Press Institute, the Columbia School of Journalism, the New York. Jesus, I've forgotten. I've. This is the best, in my opinion, of three definitions. But every major school of journalism or American institution has something similar to this, where they talk about verifiable facts being a requirement of journalism. And it's amazing how often blogs have come out and said, I'm a journalist, I declare I'm a journalist, here are all the facts, and they don't verify their facts. They make claims as say certain things are true when they are not, when they haven't been verified. Uh, we have certain friends of the show that have a tendency to do that. Uh, Not sure how much I want to get into all of that right now, but
Mm-hmm.
I think, you know, there was some pretty faulty reporting on some of the non sequitur stuff and what happened there, where people were making certain claims as fact that in fact were not true, and in some cases found to be completely made up. And bloggers would take this, and people would believe it and
Amplify
go
it.
with it. Yeah, and it muddied the waters. It desperately muddied the waters. And don't get me wrong, we have on occasion opined on non sequitur, but I think the people who have seen what we've done say, look, we broke it down and we broke down the facts and we did our best to report it. And I don't, by the way, normally consider us journalists, but I think
Mm-mm.
our standard of integrity and being accurate with the information, I feel, is far higher than other so-called journalists who have reported on it. So
Yeah,
try to
and
avoid.
I thing is I would never feel comfortable calling myself a journalist unless I was spending vastly more time on research than we have for this show. You know?
Well, and it's the death of civilization, Ansgar. By half of these definitions, I'm a journalist.
Right.
Game over. Game over. Game over.
Hmm.
If I'm a journalist, it's done. It's done. Pack it up. Go home. Apocalypse. It's the
No,
sixth trumpet has sounded.
I think I mean, to me, a lot of these definitions that your show that you were talking about, it's almost like defining a doctor by anybody who bothers to, hand somebody a bottle of ibuprofen. It's like, well, now you're a medical doctor because you gave out a medicine to somebody. Well, yeah, I handed somebody some ibuprofen. That, but the title of doctor should carry with it some authority. The title of
Yeah.
journalist should come with authority, and to have that, to carry that authority, there should be some responsibility for that authority.
That tends to be, and you get into who gets the responsibility. Now, we wouldn't necessarily want to hand that over to the US government and say that they get to
No.
decide. I understand why we wouldn't, but they actually do decide that in other countries. In the UK, they decide that. And The Guardian has some of the best journalism on the planet. Having a license, and there's a license to practice law. It used to be in this country,
Hmm.
you were a lawyer by saying, I'm a lawyer. That's it. That was, no pun intended, the bar.
Right.
You say that, you're done. And in fact, some of the founding fathers in this country who were lawyers had done nothing more than that. No, that's not true. I mean, they had actually studied and gone to school, but they hadn't passed, and there was no certification. There was no. You could literally just say, "I'm a lawyer." Boom, you're done. You can practice. You're a lawyer.
By the way,
And a number of
speaking of
people
your
did.
sources, I believe one of the sources that you wanted to potentially use may have just come alive on Twitter. You
Oh
may
well,
That would be perfect timing if that's the
that
case.
would be okay. Well, I will bring that up. So we do have. I'll get to that in a minute. We're
Hmm.
kind of wrapping up, and that's its own story. It's sort of like it's one of those in the middle pieces. It's not big enough. We don't
Fair
want to just
enough.
sit here and it's not so big. It's not a big enough thing that we could put a whole show into it, but it's not a small enough thing that I feel good ignoring it. So it's in the middle ground.
Okay.
A lawyer. Anybody who says that they were a lawyer could get to be a lawyer. And then finally, the U.S. government said, no, we are actually going to create we're going to have a bar association. They're going to decide who's a lawyer, who's not, and there's going to be certain um, certain requirements you have to. That hasn't. There are more people practicing law today in the U.S. than at any other point in history. Having lawyers be licensed hasn't had a negative impact on the field. It's had a positive impact on it.
Hmm.
I'm not convinced that we shouldn't have a licensing process for journalists, and that sounds scary. I think there are ways to do it, and I think there are ways to do it that are just have to do with integrity and honesty, and you keep politics, you keep anything else out of it. It's just about the ethics. That's in general, by the way, what it is when it comes to lawyers are not. If a lawyer lies, if a lawyer tells his client to lie, the defense prosecution doesn't matter. They are subject to lose their license to practice law. They are an officer of the court first. You've heard me use that term many times. That is a technical term. And that's one reason why the system works as well as it does. And it doesn't work necessarily all that well, but was the Churchill quote, it's the worst system out there except for every other system. Um, One of the reasons it works is because there is some forced integrity. It fails. If you're looking for a perfect system, give up. Done. You'll never find it. But it works pretty well. And the licensing and the ethical requirements are part of that. And I think there probably should be something like that with journalists, and there are in other countries, not necessarily here. And
Do
Tony
you?
Designs is correct about the attorney in fact, which is anybody. Actually, anybody still can be an attorney. Anybody can be an attorney. Absolutely anybody, as long as they're an attorney in fact. And that, yeah, Ansgar can be my attorney if I want him to be.
You
Obviously,
wouldn't want to me to be,
I
but
didn't make that. Yeah, no, I didn't. I didn't. I
yeah.
didn't. In fact, that was such a long shot. I blocked that out as a
Right,
possibility. But
right.
yeah,
Because like
no, yeah.
I don't think you want someone, some bearded Yahoo screaming at the judge, well, you're full of shit.
Well, I think being an attorney doesn't mean you're actually a lawyer, but it's a fine distinction. But wouldn't you like to be you get to say I was an attorney for a little while? I'll make you my attorney just for a little bit, a period of
Sure,
time,
why
just to have
not?
some
Why
fun.
not? Cool.
All right, good. Well, so what are you gonna say? I think I cut you off.
We also have Reed, who left us just because I haven't done a super chat in a while, and he gave us $5. So thank you very
Oh,
much.
thank you.
Since we have a break to talk about it for a second, so yes, thank you very much. But is there a country that you can think of that you think gets the closest to getting it right?
I am not an expert on what the other countries do, but thus far, to the best of my reasonably limited understanding, it would be the UK.
You think it's
Um,
okay? All right. So
I think the
so
UK, I think the
just
Guardian, and I
remember,
think there's a
he said he
yeah.
knows. He is absolutely clear on this, and the UK got it right. Just to be clear.
So in time has a layout. We have all this really nice stuff. Somebody has to broadcast the signal. Ansgar and I are each equally capable of broadcasting the signal. Right now, it's Ansgar,
Mhm.
which means there isn't going to be an accident where maybe one person's feed is accidentally cut. But we may have to revisit some of those policies because I think they result in abuse.
I
Just
do like
saying.
to abuse my power, which is why I am not a police officer and not an officer of the court.
Yeah. And my Oscar, we're gonna move production off to a third party server. And Oscar's like, yeah, but are they gonna really do as good a job as me? I like having my finger on the button.
Well, man, after the technical problems of last show, it'd be hard to argue.
Well, yeah, that was it. So I'll mention it briefly. We haven't actually mentioned any bloggers by name, and so I've been hesitant to actually call out any names or anything like that. I don't want to be a call out show, cancel show. Since everyone's going to either look it up or wants to know, there was a blogger named Katie Joy Paulson who had blog repeatedly on the Non Sequitur show. In fact, she was a host on the Non Sequitur. This is an article I did on her, The Fire and the Fury. It was on a piece she had done on Non Sequitur, and she at the time called herself a journalist, and then she'd say she's not a journalist, and say she was, and then say she wasn't, and that seemed to change based on what was most convenient based on the context of the discussion. And she had made so this is The Fire and the Fury. It's hosted on the Atheist Codex,
It's linked
or
in
the
the
Human.
description, by the way, if you want to read
Oh,
the actual
oh,
article.
perfect. It's an older article. A lot has happened since then, but she just says a lot of things that are demonstrably false. And in fact, there was a account made based on concern that she was bullying a lot of people and using her platform to bully people, using her platform to make egregious claims that had in some cases, very profound consequences to other people's lives. Um, there was a account made called Katie goes by Without a Crystal Ball. That's the name of her column, or the column she had. She went by that name. There was a commentary account called Without Any Crystal Balls, and in fact, I've been told that commentary account has just joined us. That person had been sort of following her for some time, concerned about how she was leveraging the claim that she was a journalist into this ability to garner attention for herself and then create stories. Now, some of her stories may have had some truth to them. I don't know. It seems to me like probably some did, but a lot of times she got things very, very wrong. I remember first seeing her on Non Sequitur, where she came up and said, "Well, I'm a journalist," and they had said, Kyle had been interviewing her and said, "As a journalist, could you tell us the difference between defamation, slander, and libel?" And she said, "Well, as a journalist," and she was very proud of being a journalist. So she'd say, "As a journalist, uh, I have to know the difference between these things, like the back of my hand. Here's the difference." And she got them all wrong, every single one. If she'd flipped a
Really?
coin, she'd have done, but yeah, she got it all wrong. She just got it all wrong. Now, the account that has been following her did a interesting video where she actually shows the legal definition right along with what Katie's saying. It's just sort of like, oh, but she has a tendency to do this where, yeah, well, and then she had
Well,
threatened, I guess.
I had, by the way, if you remember, talked about, in my days of literally selling what most people will constitute as snake oil, incense as
Yeah,
magic. One of the things you can do is assert things with authority, and if
yes,
you have the right amount of charisma, people just believe you.
and I think Miss Joy has, or Miss Paulson, sorry,
Mm.
has used that unfortunately to brutal effect when people would comment out that she was doing things that perhaps she shouldn't be doing. She would yell at them, badger them, and then if they still didn't listen, she would block them and then do a video on them, and then usually say, well, I work for Pathos. Pathos is owned by a $400 million company, and they use all their lawyers to protect everyone who works for them. That's me, and I right now today have these $400 million lawyers looking into this exact suit. I contacted Pathos, and there is no record of her working there. She did have a blog there. That's a different thing, and she was featured on occasion. That doesn't mean she worked for them, and I've gone over all of their
Always just
employee
this little
records.
grain of truth, just this little
Just enough.
nugget. Yeah.
And they had hundreds of people blogging for them, and no, they don't bring their $400 million lawyers to every tiny interblog dispute between. But she would threaten that a lot, and she did a lot of other. And if you're at all interested, that account has a great deal of information. I've written on it. It concerned me a couple of times because she said things that were patently false, and I said, no, you're wrong, here's the evidence, and then she would flip out. She ended up eventually apologizing to Steve McRae for accusing him of fraud, which we covered. We covered that actual accusation and why that was not a defensible claim. She accused him of it quite publicly, demanded that he prove he was innocent. Eventually, she apologized. 24 hours, he took the apology video, put it up on his website. She eventually withdrew the apology, did a copyright strike against his channel for airing the apology.
Wait a
That
minute, wait
copyright
a
strike
minute.
is still there.
I need to get this right. I was wrong. I screwed up. You know what? I decided I wasn't wrong.
Well, yeah.
I'm
Well,
mad now, so I wasn't wrong.
There have been a couple of incidents of that where yeah, listen, if you apologize, in my mind, you apologize because you've done something wrong, and even if it's
Right.
to a terrible person. Now, she got upset with Steve because she had also made other claims against him, including that he had sexually harassed her and a few other claims. And her story, she published why she had those claims, and I saw 3 instances where she repeated those claims, and in each instance she said it was for a different reason, a completely different reason happening on a different day. She didn't have a consistent story. Somebody pointed out, they're like, well, wait, did you apologize for that or just for the thing on the fraud? And she's like, well, Steve's okay with me now, so it doesn't matter. And Steve's like, well, no, you apologized and I accepted it and I appreciate it, but you apologized for the fraud.
Mhm.
You did make these allegations. If somebody's asking you, they're asking you. You know, that's on you. I haven't forgotten you made those allegations. And then she got mad, and that's when she withdrew her apology and struck his channel for airing the apology.
Without any crystal balls is also saying here in the chat that apparently she has warned people not to listen to you specifically.
Oh well, she wouldn't. Katie probably wouldn't be the first one to say that. It's the first I've heard of it. It wouldn't shock me. I've had opinions. One of the things I try to do is, one of the reasons it takes me so long to produce any content is because for the most part, I try to make sure I'm dead fucking right. And
Yeah.
one reason is because if I get it wrong, and when I get it wrong, I own up to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not that hyperbole of $400 is necessarily wrong, but at any rate, I apologize. I do my best to move on, and I try to make it right. And I'm not always perfect on any of those things, but
But if
I try to
somebody
get it
says
right.
something mean, you you retract your apology and immediately tell them, "No,
Yeah.
I was right."
Yeah. Oh God, I don't get that. Anyways, I've written on Katie a few times. I dislike her because I truly believe she is bullying people, and I believe she paints herself out to be a victim while she bullies people, and I think that that's
Well,
dangerous, and I
that's
think for the
pretty
most part that has
common
to be opposed.
in
I'm
this
sorry, what?
blog. I'm going to say that's pretty common in both blogger level and mainstream journalism. A journalist gets something wrong. People say, "Wait a minute," or a blogger, "You're lying," and they go, "Oh, well, I'm a victim. People are harassing me." No, people are telling you you're full of shit because you're full of shit.
Well, she has a way around this, which is it's my truth.
Yeah, yeah. You don't
So
get your own truth.
okay, that's what she does, and that's sort of the defense to her mistakes. And what she will do is she will come out and give what she considers to be facts and say, "Now, my truth is a legit term, but that really means my experience of something." My truth is an emotional, it's a psychological concept. It's a concept of your emotional state. It is not a concept of reality. There is one truth. And when she gets busted on having gotten something wrong, well, it was my truth that the sky is purple.
That's That's we did that show with King Crocoduck, and in
Yeah,
certain epistemologies,
that's a good.
that would be a valid, because that is my lived experience, which is just as valid as the scientific method,
Yeah,
apparently.
and that's really where she goes from. And honestly, I don't necessarily mind that she does that. I mind that she does that and calls it journalism, and I mind that she does that and says it's facts. And one of the other things she'd like to do on the non-sec thing was say, "Listen, I know things here." She, oh God. I think this may be on the piece, but this is not up for debate. We've got the tweets, the people. This is a matter of record where she would come out and say, I have insider information that nobody else has, and I think everybody should stop talking about this subject because nobody knows it as well as I do. Literally a claim she made. A day later, when people were harassing her and giving her a hard time and saying, well, wait a minute, but you seem to be wrong about this, you seem to be wrong about that, she would literally say, why are people assuming I'm involved in this? I don't know anything about it. She would make both those claims within 24 hours of each
um uh
other.
but yesterday you were the expert on the subject. Like
Yeah,
yesterday you were the
yeah.
Trump level expert. Nobody knows more than me.
And if she wasn't inserting herself into situations where she really didn't know. And the most famous one too was a thread that she hadn't been tagged into, and she jumped into and started saying, okay, here are the facts, here's what's going on. It was all wrong.
Mhm.
Some of it, I don't know whether it was wrong.
Mhm.
When people started to point that out, she really got upset and hated the pushback. And then someone said, wait a minute, what are you doing here? How did you get into this thread? Why are you in this thread? She goes, oh, I was tagged in. She wasn't tagged in. I went back and I counted. First of all, I couldn't find where she was tagged in, but I also counted all the number of participants in the thread, and it got incremented by one after she joined,
Right.
after she made her first tweet. So she had brought herself in. She saw it and was lying and saying she wanted it. And people started to really push back on that. And they said, wait a minute, tell us who tagged you in, because nobody here is coughing to it. There's no evidence, and all the evidence that you just came in on your, how did you get tagged in? She blocked anybody who says that. Now, what that tells me is she's really just looking for attention. And by the way, we all are. I am. I'm a fucking YouTuber, for Christ's sake.
Oh yeah.
Everybody's looking for attention. Everybody wants to be an expert. Everybody wants to be involved. I get that. There's a responsibility when you start to put your opinion out there. There's a responsibility. And she had zero concept of it. To the best of my ability to understand, I'm always open to another interpretation. I'll have that discussion with anybody. It wasn't necessarily going to do a huge, and she's not worth. We're not going to do a show on her, and I don't think we brought her in on the end of this because she is actually tied to a number
I
of
I
people
actually
in.
have a story that kind of relates.
Oh, please.
So it's not her, but somebody who has very similar tactics. So I'm sure you have heard by now of Anita Sarkeesian, famous.
Uh,
Yeah,
And before you actually, it doesn't sound familiar, but again, this is actually not dissimilar from the Nancy Grace tactics, and I'm mildly concerned that she would be another Nancy Grace if she had a bigger voice. And
yeah.
I loathe Nancy Grace, and it's nothing personal. It's the tactics she uses and what she does to people with complete
Mhm.
disregard for it, which is what, unfortunately, my view of Miss Paulson is. All the evidence I've seen is that she's that way. Anyway, so who's the one you're talking about?
So do you know who Anita Sarkeesian is? Like famous internet pop
Sounds familiar.
culture feminist, video
Sounds
games,
familiar, but I
or
don't. Yeah.
okay. Anyways, she made a big stink. I forget how long ago about how misogynist video games are, and there was a lot of lying. There was stealing of people's game footage and claiming it as her own. There was things like, oh, and this video game invites you to do these horrible things to women, when in fact, like doing any of those things would actually be penalized within the game and stuff like that. But anyways, more recently, I'm sure you've heard about the show that recently released on Disney called The Mandalorian. It's a
I
Star Wars
yes,
show,
yes,
yeah.
yep, yep.
So she wrote a big hit piece saying how there are no speaking female roles in the first episode, and how misogynist this is, and how bad it is, and how people are normalizing toxic masculinity and stuff like that, right? Well, the problem is in the first episode, the leader of the Mandalorians clan is a woman,
Hmm.
and she speaks from a place of authority and reverence. She is the leader of their religion. She is the leader of their people, right?
Yeah.
And so the next day, she's got a tweet out talking about, look at this. 3,000 replies to my tweet just shows that people can't stand a woman having an opinion, basically. I forget the exact wording, but she makes it sound like people are just upset that a woman has an opinion. The day
Yeah.
after, video game blogs are parroting this bullshit, saying, oh, look, she's just getting abused because she's a woman with an opinion. No, she lied.
Yeah.
She blatantly lied to spread a narrative, and this kind of thing happens all the time. And when one blogger or journalistic organization is willing to, like, one hand washes the other, they end up creating this like you say, this echo chamber of just, this person quoting this person quoting this person, with nobody actually looking into the facts of what happened.
Yeah, and I think it's and we've had this discussion before, and I think we're going to have to start wrapping it up. But this is the other, the other problem is you have to trust somebody somewhere. You have to trust some news source. You have to, because you can't research every story on your own if you could, But I do lament the days when, for example, 60 Minutes, and I remember that the time 60 Minutes folded. 60 Minutes used to be considered the premier news show on the planet.
Yeah.
And it was it wasn't O.J. Simpson. It was the tobacco company whistleblower.
Oh yeah, that
That
was a
is
huge
where they
story.
started, where they lost it, because at that point it became clear that there could be such a thing as a story so big they wouldn't cover it, and that sent shockwaves. They lost what was his name, Lowell Bergman, one of the most famous producers. They lost him because they he they wouldn't cover a story that was true, accurate, but could have cost them the entire news organization. So you have to trust somebody. You have to trust news. So you can't re-examine all the facts all the time. But that trust does have to be earned. It has to be earned over a period of time, and you can't refuse to re-examine both who you trust and who you don't trust. Although who you don't trust, probably working trust back should be a very high bar. But those that you trust, you should always be willing to re-examine on intermittent occasion if there's any significant cause for it. But it makes it a very difficult problem. How do you can't spend, if you go into a library, there's going to be hundreds of thousands of books. You can't read every book. You can't read every book. You have to judge some by the cover. You have to judge some of those books by the cover because you don't have time to read them all, and you want to read the right ones. That's not an easy task, but that's what we negotiate every day.
I actually have my own standard that I've been sort of slowly developing, right? And this is
Okay.
what it is. There's a difference between believing something
Hmm.
and amplifying it with your voice as true. If a article or a headline comes across you, and you don't feel like researching it, and it's from a source that you think, this is probably pretty true. If you don't feel like looking into it, don't retweet it. Don't amplify it. Go, okay, this is
Oh,
probably true, and move on. If you want to retweet something, please read past the headline. Please open the article and look for sources. If you see an article with no sources, none, it's probably bunk. Don't retweet that shit. The other thing I see people retweet is just screenshots of headlines. Just screenshots of headlines with the actual source of
oh,
where that headline came out of cut off, and some of them are actually a joke like blogs, like they're meant to be
Or the
fake.
Onion. It's happened more than once where somebody respectable. I think Trump actually quoted the Onion as real once.
Right. And so what some people do is they take a screenshot that cuts off where it says from the Onion, and they tweet this as a real article. Please, if you're going to retweet, if you're going to spread, if you're going to amplify, and I'm guilty of failing at this too sometimes, but try to make sure you're verifying at least the most basic source. You know what I mean?
Well, and the reality is, everybody's going to get it wrong, and we're
Yeah.
going to do some damage. You try not to. You can't. If your goal in life is to do no harm, go back to bed. You're gonna screw it up, and you're gonna accidentally hurt people. The goal really needs to be do the least harm you can, and try to push forward what's the motto of the Codex is there is no higher God than truth. It's been my experience that truth in and of itself is its own value. And the more truth you have, the better decisions are made, the better it is for everybody who's involved in circles around. But truth, an objective truth. And the goal of journalism should be, and the goal of communication should be to improve an understanding of truth. That's it. And the second that is not held in high regard, you start doing a lot of damage to a lot of people. And I have a considerable and profound dislike for people who have that disregard.
Yes. Somebody before we leave, had a fantastic suggestion. Remember when they used to teach citizenship classes in school that taught what
Yeah,
responsible citizenship is? Imagine if they actually taught you responsible social media practices, checking
that would.
sources, things like, oh, that is a brilliant suggestion. I love it. I could kiss you.
I think that is a good. My guess is it'll start to come. I think that already it's like it's nice to see that a lot of high schools aren't taking Google, not Google, sorry, Wikipedia as a source anymore.
Yeah.
That's nice. And Wikipedia is a great resource. It's a great way. Listen, if I'm going to research an article, first thing I do is go to Wikipedia. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Because I want to see sort of what the general gist is. I ain't going to fucking quote it. I'm not, anybody
No.
could write anything on there. It could be anything. But it's a good place to start. And then I start to find the resources. And then I start to find, wait a minute, is this a trusted source? Is this, and what did the source actually say? I don't trust what Wikipedia says the source says, but it's a place to start.
Yeah. Well, I think we ending on that suggestion is just an amazing place to end. So we will
Thank
see
you.
you. Thank you for the super chat, and thank you for supporting us. Thank you for coming out. Our audience is what makes this show exist, so that we're not just screaming into the void. So thank you all very much.